What if the exhaustion, brain fog, burnout, poor sleep, and constant stress so many people feel today isn't normal at all? Our guest today has worked in the world of military human performance, studying fighter pilots, elite operators, circadian disruption, inflammation, fatigue, and cognitive resilience under extreme stress. The scary part, modern civilians may now be living under similar psychological conditions every single day. Andrew Herr, welcome to Crackin Backs.
It's great to be here, Docs. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, our certain pleasure. This is going to be an interesting program. So I'm going to start out by asking you, what did military human performance, the research that you've done and discovered about the human body that would genuinely surprise the regular human being?
I think there's a couple things. One is what is actually possible from a human being. When you see blood sugar numbers from a Navy SEAL who's been in cold water for like 4 hours, most people would just be passed out at that point. Like when you see their blood work, like most people are not operating, and yet this person is generally fine and operating at an elite level. So there are tremendous outliers in this world. And that's what Navy SEAL selection is. You're selecting for outliers who can handle that kind of stuff, as well as operate in an elite group environment. And I think that's another thing that I don't know if it was surprising, but to be able to study not just individual humans as so often is the case in, let's say, a lab, but to study humans in a group under stress together, I think gives some of the most interesting takeaways, and also maybe why helps us gives us insight into why things are tough out there today for the human brain in the society that has sort of atomized us more and more.
That brings up an interesting point because Dr. Terry and I both have, for many, many years worked with performance athletes, high level, regular folks, or as some of the students call it, NARPs, non-athletic regular people. So, but with that being said, are you, do you notice that people have in their mind a certain level of ability, but yet a Navy SEAL, like when you can push someone beyond their realization that they're going way beyond what the average person notices, is that something that you see typically when you're weeding through people? Is it they can do more than they think?
I think in general, people can do more than they think, but it is also true that some people can do more than others. And part of the reason, and I think this is to me maybe the most fascinating takeaway, and one that I think is lost in a lot of people, especially Navy SEALs when you talk to them, the ability to keep wanting to push yourself harder under extreme stress or in extreme environments is itself partially modifiable and partially inborn. So the ability to want it more under extreme stress over long periods of time is itself a sort of like mixture of inborn and of something is nature and nurture together. And so I think that's the fascinating thing is like it's not just the ability to do it and does your body break down, but the ability to want it is also partially physiological.
We've interviewed some Navy SEALs over the past several years of this show, and my curiosity is that I've often heard them say that those big bruiser guys that come in that think they can kick all sorts of ass and get in there and pass this, Navy SEAL, they're the ones that usually tap out first. Is there a correlation? Like to really qualify what you're saying is the desire. Is it something that we can enhance?
I think to talk about the people, because you hear this I hear this also all the time of like, it's not always the guy you'd expect to come in. And I think part of that is for some people whose things have been easy their entire life, maybe they have not had as many experiences going through failure and challenge and how to bounce back. And you can imagine that the cadre, the people who are there evaluating, maybe they're going to push somebody like that a little harder to see if they actually can bounce back and see how they do under failure, even if they're usually performing very well. And so there's an element there where I think, you know, if you go to the movie Rudy, Rudy was very used to failure, but
Yeah.
Rudy was never going to be a Navy SEAL. He had every bit of the mindset, and that's what makes that movie beautiful. He had every bit of the mindset, but he had none of the other skills, size, talent that you would need. And the fact is, to be the best of the best, you need both, but without the mindset, you're going nowhere.
I want to
Forrest
interrupt.
Gump. Oh, wait, wait,
No,
wait, wait, wait,
Yeah.
wait, wait. What about Forrest Gump? He had the will.
Forrest Gump also had a fascinating version of it that I think is a little bit different. So Rudy had this drive and grind that sort of transmuted the like felt the challenge and transmuted it into more motivation. I think you could say that Forrest Gump had a slightly different version, which is also beautiful. I would have likened Forrest Gump's to faith, where because you have faith, the challenge is not processed the same way. Now you could say it's also just because in that movie he's autistic or you know, slow or whatever you want to call him. You know, I know the old technical term is retarded. Obviously, that term has taken on new meanings today, but you could say he just doesn't process it. But in a way, he's like someone with beautiful levels of faith, which is like he's just not thinking about getting killed because he's going to do the right thing no matter what. Whereas Rudy sees he's going to get killed and turns that into, I want to go even harder. And they're both really fascinating, but to me, like kind of a slight difference.
Terry, go
I
ahead.
mean,
What were you going to say?
yeah,
Sorry.
right out of the box, people are going to listen to you going, "Wow, we're talking Navy SEALs, we're talking this." What's your quick background that got you into this in the first place, and how did you get to the point where you're working with Navy SEALs?
Yeah. I always say if I lived my life 10 times, I would have been a doctor 5 of them. My dad's a doctor. I grew up around medicine. And my mom's side of the family is, you know, military, military, military. And my grandfather was like a kind of a no BS war hero. And so I grew up with both of those. And I found a program in university where I could do science, technology, and national security and kind of do both. And through a series of things and fellowships and scholarships, I got to go to straight to grad school, and I did graduate degrees in immunology and health physics, and a third one in national security policy, where I kept kind of both sides of that going. And then serendipity is as serendipity does. And somebody walked into the career center and said, "We need someone who does biology, national security, and can write." And they're like, "Well, we know this guy, Andrew." And so I got hired to run studies on the future of human performance and human enhancement in biotech for basically the Secretary of Defense's private think tank on the future of war.
Yeah, I think he's qualified to answer these questions.
Yeah.
And then the Navy SEAL thing is actually interesting because it happened a little bit outside the normal channels, which is to say, of a guy who had been working in the Pentagon, then went in uniform. He'd been a civilian, went in uniform, became a SEAL, and he brought his unit to DC and was basically like, "We want to do more innovative stuff. We want access to innovation." And one of the meetings I was asked to join on the human performance side, and basically how it worked out is the unit didn't have a way to hire people well. In military, you know, you can imagine the government bureaucracy happens even maybe sometimes in special ops. But basically, I got to know him and some of the other guys, and they were like, "Hey, man, like, I don't know if we can do anything formally, but like, will you help us?" And so in the end, I ended up working with them in a sort of non official way, but got to work in some ways more closely and get to know them even more closely because of that. And so that led to a bunch of interesting adventures, including jet lag and other things that came out of that work, which is all about, you know, in this world, when you get an opportunity, for the most part, you just say yes.
Ooh, love that. So, in your opinion, and based on the research, does optimization become human enhancement? Like, what is describe? The term is so used loosely as optimization or peak performance, but explain what that looks like to you and what you look for, and can that be obviously how would you facilitate the enhancement of optimization?
So I know a little bit of the backstory, at least in the military world, of where some of these terms came from. So there was an initial push into this world. There have been many pushes, but in the 90s, there was a push into this world, and there became a big pushback of like, hey, we don't want, like, from the good version of like, hey, we don't want to like run crazy experiments and hurt our guys. And then kind of a silly pushback of like, you had basically like people who'd been Olympic athletes being like, this isn't fair. And my answer is like, based on whose rules, ma'am? And so the word optimization was brought in, human performance optimization as a phrase was brought in an intentional way to be like to deal with some mostly these spurious kind of like objections of, look, I think ethics is critical and should be thought of and all these things, but I've worked with a lot of bioethicists in the military context, and most of what they have to say is neither good ethics nor useful. Because they're really focused on, well, people think this is weird and bad, whereas we need to think about, they're talking about some of the things that are important, like, hey, you can't force somebody to take part in an experiment for the most part. Like, that's, and in a military unit, a command, if it's legal, you have to legally abide by that command. So, but for the most part, there's a lot of this fear of like PR basically. And that has slowed this work in the military. And unfortunately, but a lot, because at the end of the day, enhancing my performance versus optimizing my performance, like, it's really just some assessment that there's a natural cap, and what does natural and what does cap mean? And then if we can define those, natural, I don't know that we're going to get to define. Cap, we could maybe define, but you find new outliers all the time. Then I think it's kind of a difference without a distinction.
So with that said, and thank you for that explanation, but optimization, what is how is a well, how is a military person optimized, and how could that translate to Dr. Terry or myself and any of the listeners out there?
Yeah. Somebody I worked with briefly, Dr. Adam Russell, he had a frame that there are three major areas where you're going to optimize human performance, which was cognitive, physical, and socio-emotional. And so cognitive is, mindset, thinking, intelligence, assessment, analytics, physical, kind of obvious. And then socio-emotional is leadership and assessing the veracity or the intentions of other people. So there's a lot of really rich stuff in that socio-emotional space. And so how do you want to optimize people? The answer is, what do we need to achieve the mission? Because I think the critical thing is, before somebody says, oh, we have this technology, my first question is, what's the goal? And then what do we need to achieve that? And then there's short and long term. There's, hey, what do I need to achieve this mission today? But what do I need to achieve 10 missions over the next year? Which means I can't destroy your body on this one mission, or else you're not going to be ready for mission 2, 3, 4, 5. So I think we can look at that from different lenses and different frames. But I want to think about optimizing people. My first question, I've coached executives and athletes and others over the years. And my first question is always, if you had a magic wand and could change anything about your mind or body, what would it be?
Like that. What are some of the answers that you
I mean, almost
that you
everyone
could
wants,
do?
business executives, more energy, more focus. And then,
Yeah.
about a third of people like either are brash about it at the beginning, or at the end, they want to talk about libido and sex drive. The military personnel on average want to recover faster. They want to be able to go harder and recover faster. And I think recovery, especially when we think about optimizing over longer periods of time, is one of the most critical areas to think about. And obviously, it has some of the most important inputs: sleep, nutrition, everything, everything sort of works into recovery, including obviously, and especially what you guys do.
All right. I'm going to ask you a question that I didn't plan to ask you, and you don't have to answer because it may be information that the military doesn't want to put out to the public. Um, but what I've heard when I hear the word optimization, I did not realize that they would provide a lot of the military guys anabolic steroids or androgenic, hormone. Well, we call it hormone replacement at this age, but you know, because it makes them more aggressive, it heals faster. It's almost like what you see with the Incredible Hulk. Your thought?
So, historically, and to my knowledge to this day, the military is not directly giving anybody anabolics. However, there are military operators who are acquiring anabolics, and I'm aware that there are some doctors who are not military but become close to units and sort of support individuals. Maybe they're geographically located nearby them, or you develop these relationships because if you're if you're carrying 100 pounds on your back and expected to perform at elite levels, both cognitively and physically, you need to recover faster. And the level of stress and lack of sleep and other things is going to naturally, in some people, crater your testosterone levels, for example, just as one example. And so I think I think it's totally reasonable to support people really with any of these things if we have a reasonable sense of what's not going to hurt them long term, and I believe in informed consent. I think that's the cornerstone of all the ethical stuff. But here's the trick. So in most clinical trials, it takes months and months and hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to recruit people into a clinical trial. It is one of the hardest things to do in a clinical trial. I once ran a study with a civilian group, but they were all ROTC cadets. And I consented over 400 cadets in 45 minutes into a study. Because the study was, this is not what I said, but the synopsis of it is, we're going to give you free supplements to enhance your performance. Let me tell you, everybody wanted in. And so they wanted in, and obviously, thankfully, the things we were using are very safe. But I talked about potential side effects, and I talked about all this stuff. And if you give people a very reasonable and true answer of potential side effects, those people are going to say yes most of the time. And so I think there's a weird paternalism. You have to be careful not to force people to legally do things that they don't want to do. But also, let's not mother may I adults who are making decisions, because you're also allowing them to consent into putting their life on the line.
Okay, so yes, we get that sleep, nutrition, cognitive mental state is really dependent on those two primary things. But how with the way, like in a military environment, I get it if they're, in the barracks or, at home or what have you, but when they're out there, putting their life on the line and all that, there ain't no sleeping 8 hours a day. There's not that nutrition. You're lucky if you get a space food stick. Oh, and I just showed my age. That was about 100 years ago. But things like that. How do you optimize when somebody's deprived?
I think in some ways it's actually easier because there are ways to support the body under extremists that are actually very helpful. It's harder logistically, obviously, but there are interventions, for short periods of time. For example, we find that split dosing omega-3s, meaning like taking some every period of time throughout a day, decreases cognitive decrements from sleep restriction. For example, there are supplements that Navy SEALs have reported to me help them recover much faster on deployment. I think that's the best way I can say that. And so, because there are actually things that help you recover faster and help manage, because, for example, what's the first order negative effect of not getting enough sleep? Inflammation. We can manage that inflammation with supplements. We're using omega-3s, we're using polyphenols that activate the body's natural protective systems. Even if in extreme cases, antioxidants can be helpful. But is it perfect? Am I saying you're going to get zero sleep and operate the same as if you had 8 hours? No, but that's not the point. I want you to perform as well as you can throughout your deployment. So the answer is you just do you work with what they give you. And so that's always my question is like, what can you do? And I'll go backwards from there.
I'm so glad you bring that up because, Dr. Terry and I, we have patients that always come up with an excuse as to why they're not sleeping or why they're not
Yeah.
eating properly and all that. So I love that you're sharing that, part of the perspective on these military guys. But let me ask you, what would now this may vary and per person, but you've worked with elite operators and high performers. What actually breaks down first under that chronic stress? Is it the body injuries? Is it the brain inflammation, hormones, sleep? What is there?
It definitely varies, but I would say the first thing when people are under, well, it's really dependent on the environment you're in and the mission. When you're running missions day in day out, if it's really high intensity, like special operators tend to be, like you just have less time to like ruminate about stuff. And also, an executive who's building a company and knows they're going to be doing this for the next 5 years, it's a very different mindset. It's much easier to get into procrastination and things like that when you're in the mindset of working on a project that isn't going to have an immediate impact versus like, most of these executives who procrastinate, if you put them in a meeting, they'll perform well. And I'm not saying a meeting is like a mission for military, but there's an analogy there, which is to say, procrastination. So I'd say for the military guys, it's often the special operators, often their bodies are breaking down and there's pain and inflammation, injury. Whereas in the high performance business sense, it tends to be anxiety, sleep, mental ability to focus, brain fog, and procrastination that tends to break down first. But you push each of them long enough, and you're going to get to the same place. But I would say, on average, but also, um, there's different types of stress in a way. One is, while repeated, it's very acute stress. And the other is this lower grade sustained stress over years and years. And so I do think those also are different in how they manifest. So I'll pause there.
No, that's great because so many patients, gosh, even myself, my dad used to, one of my dad's mantras were procrastination is the thief of time. I mean, I still say that to myself. Do you have any suggestions of people that like having a deadline or a goal for a time frame that you want something done? Is that some of the ways that you would suggest to someone to have to procrastinate less, or do you have to determine who that person is? Are they motivated by fear or motivated by pleasure? How do you determine?
Um, Most people who are high performers will deliver at the deadline, but it's got to be an external deadline with some sort of judgment attached. So here is my whole frame on procrastination. If I'll happy to run through it. In almost every person, there is a subconscious factor driving that procrastination. So let me give you an example, and I'm going to use this as an example, this tool called the downward arrow, which is I'm going to basically just ask over and over, and what would happen then, or what bad thing would happen then. And it's a way to try to get access to someone's subconscious. So when you do this live with somebody, you ask them the questions fast and you try to get them to respond without thinking. So let's say somebody says, here's a prototypical answer. So what's going to happen if you start the project now? Well, I'm tired, so I won't do a good job. What happens if you don't do a good job? The customer won't be happy. What happens if the customer's not happy? They won't, sign a new contract. What happens if you don't sign a new contract? The business finances will get hurt. What happens if business finances get hurt? The business might fail. What happens if business fails? My family won't love me. Whoa. And maybe it's like, what happens if business finances fail? I'll be a failure. What happens if you're a failure? My family won't look up to me. What happens if your family won't look up to me? They'll leave me. And basically, almost everyone at the bottom of this downward arrow, if they can access their subconscious or just let it go, will end up in being alone or dead or not respected. These are deep core human needs. And what your subconscious does is it makes the jump all the way from top to bottom. If I start this project, no one will love me. Well, let me tell you, it's a bad idea to start that project if that were true. But of course, whenever you do this downward arrow, either one of the steps is wrong. It is probably, God, I hope, not true that if your company fails, your family will not love you. Or sometimes someone gets all the way to the bottom of the downward arrow and it's all true, but many of those steps are things you have you're in your control. And so, but so now you've helped someone understand why are they procrastinating, but understanding why is not the solution. But what it does is it helps somebody understand that actually they need to train their subconscious. And the way we train our subconscious is to give it evidence that this is not true. So how do you do it? It's classic exposure therapy. Just like if somebody is absolutely phobic or terrified of spiders, what do? You do not bring them into a room with a bunch of spiders. The first thing you do is you print out a picture of a spider and you work with them to get comfortable near a photograph or even a drawing, so not even real. And then you go to a photograph and then you go to a video. But each of these things you do slowly, step by step. For somebody who is phobic of working out, first thing you do is, okay, today you're going to put your shoes on. You're going to go to the door, put your shoes on, and you're going to then not go out the door. You're just going to put your shoes on. Nothing bad happened. It's okay. Then you're going to put your shoes on and go to the car, but you're not going to drive to the gym. Nothing bad happened. So you have to train your brain that it's actually safe to do this thing. And a critical piece of this that is both counterintuitive and sometimes hard to do is you have to count those little things that seem silly as wins. And you have to be really explicit in your mind that putting on your shoes today and not going to the gym was a win. Because if you code it as, fine, I did that, I'm so weak, all I can do is put my shoes on, then you just coded it as a failure. And now you're making the whole thing harder and harder. So my whole take on procrastination is that in almost every case, it's anxiety driven. Something in your subconscious is there from some experience or something you learned for whatever reason. And we need to train our subconscious that it is not a danger. And the ways to do that are the exposure therapy I mentioned. Faith also and religion can also help people show that it's not that's not a true danger. So there's all, doing it with other people sometimes is a trick because that's not solving the problem. But if my anxiety is around social things and there's somebody watching me do it and I don't want to let that person down, I'll sometimes do it. So, there's all kinds of tricks in the interim, but the long-term solve is training your subconscious that it is not dangerous to start the project when it's on your schedule.
Andrew, this is fantastic stuff, man. I really love it. There is two things that reminded me. You had mentioned about the spider metaphor. Terry, what was it? What do you think of that guy who created that we had on our program, created the virtual reality program,
and 1 pixel at a time.
Yeah, 1 pixel of a spider on a virtual until it gets blown up, and he got somebody over to overcome his fear of spiders. It was really, really that's a great example.
So you're getting data. You're safe pixel by pixel, by pixel, and you do the same thing behavior by behavior. So yeah, that's a beautiful example analogy.
And what's interesting is what you actually did was something that I was put through. They called it the Charles Dickens strategy, where they took the Scrooge and brought him years in advance if he continued to be an asshole, that kind of thing.
Yes.
And what would happen. And then they brought him back and he was able to be a nice guy. So Terry, go ahead.
Often you got to work through the change. Unfortunately, it's not a switch flipped. Usually I will say some people can flip the switch. It's very rare though.
For a lot of regular people, not your Navy SEALs, but regular people, they get into their world and they get really stressed and they think just anything is stressful. And then I think they're influenced a lot by influencers, movies, and books. And now you're seeing, you see movies where there's a super soldier, Captain America, and now there's the enhanced games going off in Vegas coming up. And then you see people talking about the super soldier and accessing the brain and the subconsciousness and consciousness, and now there's the Nordic society, and they're trying to put people under and see if brain travel is possible. What's your thoughts on some of this blend of fantasy versus reality?
I think the good parts of this stuff are helping people realize there are things you can do to live a better life and feel better and perform better and get towards your mission. Like, I think, people being public that they're taking things and eating differently. And, obviously there was a lot of talk about the Hollywood diet, the superstar does to undergo the transformation. And originally they didn't talk about all the steroids they were taking and the HGH. But now, honestly, like, for some people, I think it's a reasonable decision. For other people, it depends on your age and if you had kids and you want kids and what's your risk tolerance. But like, I think it's really valuable that people know there are things you can do. However, the further we get away from things that have been shown to work over time, the easier it becomes to sell things as snake oil. I am very allergic to products where you don't either notice the difference within a few weeks, or two, it changes a lab value that matters or something like that. So if somebody tells me you should take this supplement every day for 30 years and it'll help you at 30 years, but you won't notice anything for 10 years, like, I'm probably not going to take it, to be honest. Um, so that's my general take. But then I think the fantasy stuff, I hope it inspires people. Some people are always going to be, the Instagram problem is real, which is to say, everyone's living a great life and happy and traveling all the time, and I'm miserable in a shitty job that I hate. And so I do think that's real. I think it's important that we are aware of the propensity of humans to compare themselves to others. And so I do think social media is really, really bad in that regards. But I also think it can be inspiring. And so, I want to take the positives. I want to acknowledge the negatives, take the positives. I think on balance it's bad, to be honest. Um, but yeah, I think some of the, I also think things are possible that seem wild. So, and the second we close off our minds to possibilities, that's the moment we're locked in the box. So, is it possible? Is ESP possible? I don't know. Maybe. I don't seem to have ESP, but like, I've seen wild things in my life, and I'm not closed off to the idea that there is a lot more going on than I learned in school. I've become spiritual as I've gotten older, religious spiritual, and I believe things I didn't used to believe. And so I think there's a lot out there, but um, I also want rigor. And I think this, I'll close this off by saying there is one path forward for every person. Now, that seems crazy because everyone's physiology is different, psychology is different. The path forward for everyone is N of one experimentation. You should take each thing you do and run it as an experiment on yourself. Does it help you get towards your goals? Does it help you feel better? And does it help you feel better over a period of weeks? Because some things make you feel better today, but if you do it every day for 2 weeks, you're not going to feel very good. Um, so run the experiment. People always often ask me, does this supplement work? Does that supplement work? And I'm like, I might tell you, for most people I've seen it does work. But the answer is run the experiment and see if it works for you. And if it doesn't, great, you don't need to spend money on it. And if it does, great, you found something that works for you. Fantastic. I think N of one experimentation is the key path forward um, for everyone.
Mm. And that's
You
from
know,
a researcher.
right, right.
It's great. Yeah.
Now everybody says modern civilization is getting harder. Yeah, if we look back in past civilization from the Roman times, all that, it was, you're lucky you lived past 30 years old, right? But now is modern civilization getting closer to low grade operators because of everything we're exposed to?
I think modern civilization is absolutely more anxiogenic, is much more anxiety generating, where you're dealing with much more chronic psychosocial stress than people did, except obviously in times of hunger and famine. That's a different thing. But yes, I think today's society is almost perfectly designed to make people low grade anxious all the time. Because the two great human stressors, as far as I'm concerned, once you get out of the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy, which, do you have a roof over, are you dying of exposure, are you dying of famine, things like that, are uncertainty and social judgment. And the way we've designed society, if you look at jobs, 50 years ago, you were going to work at the same company for a long, long time. And you had, as long as you didn't mess up, you had a job. Today, no way. Uh, like, what better tool for to feel socially judged than social media? I can keep going on, but basically, and then everything we do, eat, consume today, every one of our senses is constantly assaulted. Hearing the music you listen to today, if you listen to the average pop music today, it's pretty negative. Your nose, you look at the synthetic fragrances people are breathing in all day long, I think it's probably pretty pro-inflammatory. If you look at the things coming to our eyes, social media, Instagram, Facebook, like all day long, that's not helping. Things touch. Think, what are people putting on their skin? And people are further away, so there's not as much touch. There's not as much social interaction. Anyways, you can go through every sense, every way we gather data, and every one of them is essentially being assaulted all day long by things that are negative or things that can trigger anxiety in a human. Therefore, the low grade stress is just there constantly. And I think, to your point, that has a massive physiological effect and psychological.
Yeah, I agree. One of your big things is jet lag, and the world has gotten smaller and people are flying more, they're traveling more. Heck, my son was in 4 countries in less than a month in different time zones, and so what is the travel expense, the travel itself? You associate jet lag with circadian rhythms. What's the physiological trauma that's being bombarded for all these business executives, these people that are traveling constantly? What's your
Yeah,
thoughts on that?
this is something I figured out based on work I was doing with the SEALs. They have massive pressure changes in their life in diving. And it turns out that there's some really fascinating Navy research showing that large pressure changes can cause an inflammatory response, oxidative stress, and then inflammation. And fast forward, I had a client as a business executive who's flying from the East Coast to Asia to close business deals. They'd land at 4 p.m. There's a big dinner that night, and the other side wants to negotiate at 7 a.m. the next morning. Basically, the Koreans in this case were using jet lag as a negotiating tool. And he said, Andrew, what should I do? I was like, great, David. When are you leaving? It's like Tuesday. It was Sunday. I was like, thanks, David. I'll give you something tomorrow. So I sat down and had to develop a program. But the core of what I have over time figured out is the pressure change in flight. So when you take off, the average commercial airliner at altitude pressurizes to 8,000 feet relative. Basically, it's like climbing an 8,000-foot mountain in 15 minutes. You're getting a taste of altitude and decompression sickness. That's causing oxidative stress, which can then turn on an inflammatory response because of the hypobaric hypoxia, low pressure, lower oxygen. At altitude, you're breathing about 26% less oxygen because of the lower pressure. And so this hypobaric hypoxia leads to an inflammatory response. Then, now let's say you're flying long distance, you actually can't sleep a full night, even if you had the time on a plane, because if you sleep 8 hours on a flight to Asia, you're going to wake up at like 3 p.m. and you're not going to bed that night. So you actually need to you have to have a short night of sleep there. First negative effect of not sleeping is inflammatory, plus low sleep quality causes this inflammation. Anyways, the dryness will then affect your lungs, and you're more sensitive to inflammation, your upper respiratory tract. Long story short, this inflammatory piece then overlays the circadian piece. And what I've found over time is that if we block the inflammatory effect and keep it low over time, we can flip your circadian rhythm night one using all the tools, supplements, light, meal timing, sleep timing. And, in the last trial we did a study with Inter Miami, the pro soccer team, where they took a round the world trip. I think it was 5 matches, 4 cities in a month, and they actually did a full round the world. And they saw the players who used this protocol saw 94, 95% fewer symptoms from travel than the players who didn't.
So
It's basically orchestrating all the tools. It's because timing is such a big piece. So basically, we had to figure out a way to orchestrate the supplements and the blue light blocking glasses and the meal timing, sleep timing, and that's been the lift to make this into a product, basically.
So for the person looking for listening that's traveling tomorrow, what is without giving all your secrets away, what's some tips that a person can do that's going to be flying and have that? Because I literally have a guy or had a guy that flew to Asia, landed, they didn't even leave the airport. They didn't allow him to. They went to a conference room and they made him sign some paperwork. And then he had to get on the flight like 4 hours later and fly back from China. And so now that you're telling me that they use these as a tool, and I'm like, wait, you're flying all the way to China and you're there for 2 hours? He goes, maybe three, you know? And so what's some tips that the person listening who's flying for either not even business, for family, for anything like that, because you hear, well, get on the same time frame, time slot. If you're going to go there and it's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, but it's night there, sleep then, put your lights, block on. What's some other things that these people can do besides, and also stay hydrated?
Yeah. So, what are some things you might have around the house if you're flying tomorrow that can help you manage this inflammatory effect? Obviously, we've custom formulated some stuff. We've talking around it, but I have a company that sells this product that has an app and customizes it all for you, and we do our own custom supplements. But some things you might have around the house that you could use: vitamin C, ascorbic acid, will help manage the that initial oxidative stress insult, and omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil. Dose throughout the day. Take a few of them during that travel day can help. But there's other things that don't have to do with supplements that you can do to prepare your body. So, for example, when you work out, it upregulates it turns on the genetic switches in our cells to produce more protective enzymes and compounds. So, obviously, you don't want to work out right before you get on a plane and be sweaty, probably. But if you can work out in the few 3-4 hours before you get on a plane, it's actually going to prime your body to be more protected. Sauna will do the same. These sort of hormetic stressors, like workout and sauna, will prime your body. I also like these polyphenol compounds. These are the things they call antioxidants in fruits and vegetables are actually not, they don't work as antioxidants in your body. It's actually a totally mechanistically and from a physics standpoint impossible and wrong. What they do is these compounds activate a genetic switch called NRF2 that turns on the production of detoxifying enzymes and protective compounds in your cell. So, what's that look like? Things that are foods that are highest in polyphenols are, let's say, berries, where you eat the skin and the skin is dark. So, blueberries and strawberries and raspberries and things like that, compounds like that. Then, in terms of sleep, the trick, if you're going over for 4 hours, honestly, the best thing you can do, if it won't, if it allows you to be awake during the meeting time you're there, is keep your home time zone. Don't switch at all if you're going for 4 hours. That works best. But if you're going for days like a normal trip, then what you want to do is careful not to sleep too much on the flight over. Because what you need to optimize is you're optimizing between being awake and alert enough to make it to bedtime that next day and not just like falling on your face asleep, but not sleeping so much that you're not going to be tired and can't fall asleep that first night in country. So most people sleep too much on planes to Asia, when the optimal sleep is 3 to 4.5 hours, maybe a little more if you're not using the kind of support we give you physiologically in our kits from supplements and other things. But to Europe, it's often people don't make that mistake because the flight's shorter and like you just like there's only so much time on that flight to Europe. If it's east on the West Coast, you can mess it up, but from the East Coast to Europe, you can only sleep 4 or 5 hours on that flight over. So you kind of take what you can get. So I'd say those are a few examples, some supplements, some behaviors, and then move around on the plane, hydrate a lot, stay away from alcohol if you can, because that ramps your sympathetic nervous system, your fight or flight, messes up sleep quality, causes more inflammation for people. And careful of the plane meals, because plane meals are pretty salty, and it's for two reasons. One, it helps preserve the food, but two, your taste buds don't work as well at altitude. So they're adding more salt for it to taste better. But then if you have too much salt and you're not hydrating properly, that really can mess with your body also.
What kind of meals would you order? A special meal when you travel, or would you just?
I mean, I usually want to just bring food. You could either bring food with me, honestly, or, if I'm in an airport and I have time and I'm going to eat, I'm going to try to get some protein, some veggies, whether that's chicken, fish, beef, whatever, just something something, too much carbs, especially before you sit, can spike your blood sugar, which itself can be kind of pro-inflammatory. So, um, staying away from, obviously, from things like fried food and sugar and things that can mess with our system. But if, on a plane, I don't know, I personally just typically won't eat on a plane unless it's food I brought myself that is kind of clean. It turns out you obviously cannot bring liquids through security, but you absolutely can bring a Tupperware of dinner through airport security, and they may look at you strangely, but they do not stop you from bringing it unless it's soup or something, I guess.
Yeah, I can see Spencer and I, we have a show coming up on Monday, that by this time it'll already come out on sardines. So, I can see us cracking open some sardines and the person next to us would just love us.
I do try to make it as a policy not to bring fish on a plane. That seems like a bad manners. Cans of tuna, that even the jars of tuna, the very nice stuff in olive oil, that's very bad manners, I think. So I'm with you. Um, but man, the sardine diet is getting a lot of
It's getting a lot of
PR
pop.
right now.
Yeah. All right. So you have a special operator, you have a CEO, and you have exhausted parents. What's biologically, do they all have in common?
They probably all have in common ramped up sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight system, which is then going to make it harder to sleep well. You're going to be having typically higher levels of cortisol and stress hormones that then can over time cause immune dysregulation and inflammation. And on average, you're probably not eating very well, to be honest. All three of those groups tend not to eat super well. And so then you're either, depending on you're either underfeeding yourself, which is a problem for some people, or most people are overfeeding themselves. And now you're gaining weight. And, one of the sort of brutal ironies of gaining weight is that fat tissue is not inert. It's not just fat sitting in those cells. That fat tissue is an organ, and it is putting out inflammatory cytokines and hormonal stuff or things that are affecting your hormones. Sadly, none of which seem to help us get out of the situation. So it's a little bit of a vicious cycle. So I'd say all those groups are probably under poor sleep, more inflammation, worse stress hormones. Um, but some people, the environment you're in and the level of trust you have with the people, with your spouse, with your coworkers, with your teammates, there are things that really modify it. And so the impact of that on your body and mind goes through a lens of things like trust, things like mission focus, and is obviously also modulated by diet and exercise and others.
Hmm. What's some of the concerns you see with all the science you're doing and the research you're doing of the future of human performance?
Um, I so I'll just give you a gamut of things that are in no particular order. One, this health optimization stuff can become a source of anxiety all its own, and that's basically unhelpful. Right? There was a study that people were talking about recently. They put, I don't know, Oura rings, Whoop, whatever, some wearable, and when they tell people their sleep was worse, they performed worse. And when they told people their sleep was better, they slept better, irrespective of how they actually slept. Not great. Um, I think there's a lot of new compounds on the market, supplements, peptides, prescription drugs, where we don't yet know some of the impact. And so maybe for short term use, maybe I'm less concerned. But for very long term use, I think we really don't know what the implications of some of these peptides that are coming, including the GLP-1s. Look, short term, they obviously work to help people lose weight. They have all kinds of other odd and interesting effects on behavior. Um, what does it mean to have your dopamine system shifted and your level of connection to things shifted? That's a little bit of a weird. That I can go down a rabbit hole pretty hard on that one if I need to. So I think we should be smart about using things that we don't understand how they work as much, and or things that we may not have data on long-term effects. I think we should, if we need to use them or want to use them, I think we should bias towards using them short term or intermittently. For example, the compound BPC 157 is a peptide that many people use. It's obviously people are using it for recovering from injuries, so you probably see patients coming in and on it, and it seems to help some people recover faster from injuries. Does that mean you should take it all the time? I don't know. Does that mean if you have a really nasty injury? I know somebody who tore their biceps, full tear, really nasty injury, and he used it to recover from that surgery. And like, I don't know, that felt like a reasonable trade off to me. Yeah, serious injury. Um, but like, should you take that every day for the rest of your life? I don't know. Then I have to have some more questions. So I think those are some things I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about a lot these days in terms of concerns, but I'm also optimistic. There's more data, the ability to run your own trials and to get access to your own blood work to see how things are affecting you has gotten so much easier in the last 2 years, let alone the last 5 years. So I think there's a lot that's going better. I think like the answer is always to do it in a way that is working for you and not against you.
So, what is something that modern humans don't realize that they're built or designed for? In other words, from what I understand, that we tend to forget that we're back in the caveman days. We are always not only the hunter but the hunted. And so some of that is still in our genetics, or in our cellular level, of that. There's a certain amount of stress that's normal, that we're always in that fight or flight scenario. Is there anything that you feel that we were designed, how we were designed to really function? What should someone be thinking instead of always under stress?
I mean, first of all, like many things that are different in modern society. One, move more.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
God, yes.
it's just the fact that like hunting is an intense activity. Gathering is actually a very, very labor intensive activity. And so men and women were both moving, maybe different ways. Hunting is a little bit, we'll have endurance with a little bit more of that, sprint kind of aspect to it. Whereas gathering tends to be more of like more of a low and slow endurance activity. But certainly people were moving more. Two, people lived in close connection with their with their families and extended families and other people, and like this atomized society where you don't know your neighbors and you maybe just talk to people on the phone, which is not the same as seeing them in person. Like we're just not designed that way. And it's not good for people. So I think, and then, like, we talked about it earlier, how all these different parts of society are assaulting all our different senses. Like before, we were in nature, and there's all of these like weird studies that seem to suggest that when you stare at a picture, you look at a picture of green and nature, you have less stress than when you look at a cityscape. So what's going on there, and what is it about these built environments that we live in that are more anxiogenic? I've heard some people suggest it's like in a forest, there's always going to be birds chirping and things like that. And when they stop, it tends to mean there's a predator around. And so it's interesting to want, like, some people have suggested, like, literally the absence of some of these tones in our environment suggests to our brain there's always a predator. I don't know if that's true or not, but you could see how these different things would have subtle but important effects. And then there's just like, I mean, the majority of younger women are on are on a are taking a hormone every day that's changing their mind and bodies. What is the impact of taking a hormone that is not exactly like, but suggesting to your brain that you or body that you're pregnant a lot of the time? And so, I mean, we are messing with and then, it's not just women, men are taking things and eating things. So, like, we are in a wild divergence from the norm. We also have things that are amazing. We have incredible access to food. In America, we have incredible access to healthy food for the most part. We our level of wealth and space we have and resources is like, and our access to knowledge is unparalleled. So there are great things, and we can use these resources to help. But man, we're in an environment that is in many ways misaligned.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's absolutely That is ideally important too. Um, we are nearing the end of our program, and we always have this rapid fire question that there's 5 of them that we would love to ask you, and they're some of them have nothing to do with what you do for a living, but you personally. So if you're prepared for rapid fire question number 1,
I did
and
not study, so I don't know what's coming, but I'm ready for it.
there you go. It's stuff you would know already, but here's the deal. The answers are rapid fire. They're brief. So
Well, it's like
here's
his arrow down, it's just,
yeah,
Yeah,
arrow
yeah, just
down,
hit
right,
me with a
right.
downward arrow. There you go.
Right, there you go. All right, Andrew. Rapid fire question number 1. Do you think burnout is really an inflammatory disease? If so, what is one tip that the listener can begin to do today to change their course?
Partially, and if you're in burnout, your sleep is a mess, and sleep is really a heavy hammer on inflammation. So I would work on ways to optimize your sleep. There are supplements that can help, breath work before to calm your nervous system, take a shower before to calm your system, and also play with the heat parameters that your body needs to fall into deeper sleep. I can keep going, but I'll stop. We're rapid fire.
That was fantastic. Good. I think sleep is very underrated. Yeah. Question number 2. What is the biggest lie modern wellness culture tells people these days?
Take this pill and you'll look like this guy.
There you go.
Love
That's
that.
good. Yeah, that's perfect.
Or take this shot.
Yeah.
Whatever. Take this, do this one thing, and suddenly everything in your life will be better. Like, I regret to inform you, that's unlikely to be the case.
Question number 3, Andrew. What would surprise people most about how elite operators actually recover?
I think the most surprising thing would be to people that like pro athletes and these guys are not always taking care of themselves as well as they could.
And
Pro athletes
that's
in particular, it is very, you have some, but it is rare that people are eating super well all the time and doing that kind of stuff.
you are not kidding. It always fascinated me that some of the baseball players that were in Major League Baseball that came from other countries that had the worst diets and they were smokers. It was like,
Yeah.
how do you? Anyway, question number 4. Favorite jet lag trick you have learned over the last years?
I mean, guys, I sell a product that solves it all for you. So, like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm going to sell my product here. It's called FlyKit, FLYKITT. Go to our website. It works. If it doesn't work for you, we just give you your money back.
Love it. All right. Question number 5, Andrew. When it is all stripped away, the science, the performance, the optimization, hey, man, what do you hope people remember you for as a human being?
I believe that my mission here is, even in healing, is to help people heal so they get more connected to the whatever you want to call it, to God, to truth, to spirit. And I hope that I am able to help some people find that beauty in their lives.
Andrew, that's a perfect way to end the show. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your knowledge and what you've done for human performance. Thank you.
Well, it's been a joy. We got to talk a lot more about the psychology stuff, and sometimes it's all about pills and potions, which I enjoy also. So this was really, really a fun show, and thank you both for having me on, and look forward to continuing the conversation offline.
There you go.